Melissa Reddy is from The Independent. Vaishali Bhardwaj is from Premier League Productions. And I'm delighted to say we have a champion of the Women's Super League, Chelsea's Anita Asante. Congratulations to you, Anita. Now, if I were with you, I would present you with this. But I have to say, I'll have to have the celebratory champagne. Actually, I'll have it sent over, don't worry about that. But congratulations to you. How does it feel?
It's amazing. I mean, it's great feeling for the team to finally have a resolution, of course, but to see our hard work acknowledged. Unfortunately, we didn't get to finish off the season as we would have wished, to complete, all the games that were left to be played. But, of course, it's a great result for us, and we're absolutely ecstatic, and it allows the team to focus for next season and look ahead to new goals and challenges. I guess from a Chelsea perspective, we feel like we performed very well this season. We were still unbeaten. Our form and our momentum was quite good. So I think we would like to believe that we would have continued probably in that form. Of course, that you can't predict the future. You never know what would have occurred. But I think ultimately, this is the best result, considering no one in our league, I believe, would have wanted to see their hard work go to waste and be a null and voided season.
Mm-hmm. We'll return to the subject of Chelsea's win and all of the other implications from it. We know that Liverpool aren't happy about the league being decided in this fashion. We'll return to that in a short while, but we will reflect on the events of the past 10 days. And of course, this week, Jadon Sancho led the protests from football. What was your reaction, first of all, Anita, to what happened last week and this week?
Well, I think the incidents of George Floyd and everything that we're witnessing at the moment is obviously very triggering. And, it's upsetting to see. I think we share in that anger, that fear, and that unrest. I think lots of people feel like we've been unheard for such a long time. And that's what's spurring a collective movement globally as well, because it resonates with all of us to some degree. And for me, as an athlete, it's great to see role models like Jadon, stepping up, using their platform in a positive way to show a symbolic message, really, and that's what you want to see, because a lot of young people, respect those athletes. They want to see and feel heard, and they support them, obviously, off the pitch. And it's nice to have that acknowledgement as well, I think, from as a member of the public, to see that your people you respect and your idols have also got your back, and they're willing to stand out and spread the message, really. So I share in that, and I support them wholeheartedly in whatever actions they decide that they're taking on the pitch.
No message no tweet from the Women's Super League. What's your reaction to that?
I mean, as a player, of course, I think, I guess it's disappointing in one sense, if you think about just how it's managed, this whole movement, it has managed to bring lots of people together in recognition that there is infringement on basic human rights for minority groups and Black people, and it's no longer accepted, and we refuse to tolerate it in that regard. So on that level, you would like to see a big entity, a big sporting body support something as valuable as that. On the flip side of that, as a member of that community, I also don't want to see token gestures. I don't want to see just basic statements, or it's another trend, it's another campaign, it's another way to just preserve the institution or show that, we support this message without any actual commitments, because people want long-term commitments to the cause and to the issues that we face, and also tangible things that they can incorporate and embed within their institutions and the game as a whole that they govern. So in that respect, I think either, entities like the WSL, they either do it fully, or as they have done at the moment, don't do anything at all then.
Bring in our other two guests on the show, because both the clubs that they are very well connected with, have made very strong gestures in the past 5 days. Chelsea, with yourself, Vaishali. And I'll start with you, Melissa, and Liverpool, because that decision to take a knee, and the words of Ryan Brewster, very striking at the start of this week.
Yeah, I think the decision to take the knee, what I felt very warmly about was it wasn't a club decision. It wasn't the club saying, hey, we've got to do something, everybody's doing something, what can we do? It was the players actually discussing it. And, you know, Virgil van Dijk, Gini Wijnaldum talking through it, and the rest of the squad saying, we don't want our black players to have to put out this messaging on their own or as individuals, because essentially, if we're going to eradicate racism, if we're going to ensure that that Black Lives Matter and that Black people have basic human rights, and you know that their dignity is not infringed on, that their lives are not being looted, not just in America but around the world, then we have to stand together with them. It's not a fight on their own. And so that's how that came about, the entire squad discussing it and thinking it has to be a communal effort. As you said, Ryan Brewster, I will never not be overwhelmed by how young he is, but how maturely and powerfully he speaks on, you know, the most important topics. And I had actually messaged him and I said, you're such a talented footballer, so it's easy to be a footballer. It's easy to be talented. It's not easy to take such a strong stance on this, especially when you are so young and you're still, you know, in the embryonic stage of your career. So sponsors and stuff might look at you and might think, he's a bit problematic, he's a bit outspoken, you know, and, you know, clubs in future and stuff. So for him to be able to ignore all that and still come out so strongly with such emotion was very good to see. As Anita mentioned there, you don't want performative stuff at a time like this. This is not a social media campaign. This is not some PR strategy. This is, for centuries, an issue that we are trying to combat, or should be trying harder to combat, and should be doing everything possible. So, you know, putting a black square and then going back to regular life, or a club tweeting something and then not addressing the lack of diversity in their boardrooms or, you know, throughout the institution, it really doesn't help. And one of the things I found great about all the players that spoke out, you know, you mentioned Brewster, but just in the Bundesliga as well, where all eyes are because it's the only major league, you had Jadon Sancho scoring the first hat-trick of his professional career, where all the, you know, the world's attention is on him because he's the most exciting young footballer in the world. He's going to fetch, you know, over £100 million if he does transfer. Manchester United and Real Madrid are interested in him. So it was his big moment, and he chose his big moment to say, this is not about my achievements on the pitch. This is about justice for George Floyd. And throughout the Bundesliga, McKennie, Thuram, everything that we saw was very heartfelt. You could tell the players were moved by it. And this is important because these are young guys who are doing well for themselves, who feel a part of their community. They're not made to feel different because of their skin color or whatever in football, because it is so inclusive. And yet they're still using their platforms and their moments to say, we are with you. We're going to, you know, bring more light and bring more attention to this. And we're not going to stop supporting you and pushing this, which obviously is imperative if we are to move forward.
Cover Chelsea, you know all about the fight that they have gone on over the last couple of years to rid themselves of the negative element within their club.
They have worked really, really hard in the last couple of years to address lots of issues that have plagued their club and the club support, particularly on the road. You know, in those Champions League games we saw a couple of years ago, what happened in Paris, and also, you know, the issue of anti-Semitism as well. They've worked really hard to back those causes. Chelsea obviously released that photo shortly after. I think it was Liverpool had released their photo of their players kneeling at Cobham. Another striking picture, I think. And, you know, as Melissa mentioned it, I've been really pleased to see just how many players, not just from a black and ethnic minority background, but white players as well, who have come out and have had the freedom to say, actually, I'm going to speak up. I'm going to speak up even if I don't understand necessarily what it feels like to be involved in a racist incident. And I'm going to reach out and I'm going to say, actually, I don't understand necessarily the concept of what it feels like to be in that situation, but I want to support my black and ethnic minority colleagues and people generally in society. What happened with George Floyd, for me personally, was quite it was quite traumatic in a lot of ways. I mean, I grew up in East London. I don't speak about it quite often, but I saw a boy stabbed. To this day, I don't know if it was a murder, but it was a racist incident. I was a little girl at the time. Me and my family have been victims of racist abuse. You can only imagine what it was like in East London in the early 90s. So for me, when I saw the George Floyd video, I think I wasn't so much shocked at what happened, at that this was another incident of police brutality in America, but actually that it was captured on video, you know, seeing this man lose his life on camera. And for me, I've been pleased to see that the football world has responded to an issue in society that continues to plague society, particularly American society. And that they feel like they can do that. And when we're talking about seminal moments, I actually feel like this could be a seminal moment in football, in society. I hope it is. I actually think, going back to Ryan Brewster, what he did 3 years ago when he gave that interview to The Guardian talking about racism, that was a very brave move. And I felt like it opened up the eyes to a lot of people in our industry about what some of these young players are going through and what they have gone through in the past. What Raheem Sterling did, speaking up about racism, speaking up about perceptions in the media, how we perhaps perpetuate racial stereotypes, that was important. But what I have noticed is that, you know, when the Sterling incident happened and people started these conversations in our field, I still felt some people were a bit scared to talk about it. They were scared almost as though they might say the wrong thing. And now what I'm seeing is, speaking to my friends in the industry, is that everyone's talking about it and they're admitting, actually, I don't understand what it feels like to be involved in that, but I want to learn and I want to still talk about it. And I think that's an important message, that the conversation has been started and hopefully it will continue on, but everyone is a part of that conversation.
Vaishali, just before I move on, have you watched the video? Can you watch the video? Should we be repeatedly watching images of Black trauma?
I don't think there's ever a danger of anyone becoming immune to watching that, because it's horrific. I don't think anyone who has any ounce of humanity in them would not be able to watch that and think, oh my God, this is terrible. I didn't watch it for the first day or so. I chose not to watch it because I've watched so many things over the past couple of years, and it reminds me of when I was a child. I was still reeling off what had happened to Ahmaud Arbery, if I'm being honest, because I've seen things like that happen in my area when I was growing up. But I did choose to watch it eventually, and I think just because I felt it was important for me to get the facts right from my own point of view, so that I knew what had happened. There is perhaps a danger of continually watching it. I think now that it's out there in the public domain, everyone knows what's happened now. You could read about it. And I feel that there is a danger that some people may be traumatized, particularly young children, but that is an individual decision that either a parent or someone has to make. I don't think we can just say everyone shouldn't watch it. They should watch it. I think it's very much an individual decision.
Just to start by saying, the last week has been extremely emotionally draining for me as a Black woman and as a mother. When the social media reports first started to gain traction about that tragic death, I tried not to watch the actual video because I saw people commenting about it, so I didn't want to watch it. And then I haven't watched the news for the last few weeks, just with everything that's going on in the world with the pandemic. And it just so happened the news was on, and I caught the news, and lo and behold, the video of George Floyd being murdered came on. And my daughter was in the room, and it's like she just stopped what she was doing and watched. And then afterwards, she walked out my room, came back in, and she went, "Mum, why is it that white police officers don't like black people and they killed them?" And I literally burst into tears, because how do you explain that to a 10-year-old? How do you explain that, yes, these things do happen, they will happen, and they most probably will continue to happen in some shape or form, whether it's being murdered by a police officer, whether it's experiencing covert racism, whether it's experiencing overt racism. She will experience that. She has experienced that already from 5 years old. So as a mother, I've had to not only deal with my own emotions of watching that video and knowing what goes on in America, knowing how that racism and that discrimination manifests itself within the UK and within the industry I work in, but then also having to manage my feelings and my emotions of having to explain to a child who is only 10 that as a black woman, she is going to experience racism and discrimination throughout her years. And it's just been extremely draining and extremely emotional this last few days.
Football isn't good enough. Football isn't strong enough.
No,
Indeed,
so
in black people.
I think what people misunderstand is that this isn't a football issue. This is a societal issue. So when it happens in football, it's as a result of the society that we're living in. And, you know, I do a lot of work. I sit on the board of BComs. We've worked with a number of broadcasters over the years for them to change the output and change what their presenters look like, to diversify it more, to diversify people that are on their production teams, on their editorial teams, to diverse their organizations as a whole. And it's got to the point now where I will say they're not doing enough. They're not doing enough. Football is not diverse enough. And the powers that be need to change that. And I think a lot of the reason why I have been so emotional and so drained the last week is because as a mother, it is my responsibility to be a catalyst of change for my daughter. I don't want her to grow up in a society or in an era where she is still experiencing the things that I experienced, the things that my parents experienced, and the things my grandparents experienced. I've had enough. I'm tired. And I don't see why she should have to go through the same thing. So I've put on myself to make sure I use my voice. You know, I do a lot of work with BComs. I do a podcast called Dope Black Mums. And so people know me on social media. And so I feel like I have a responsibility to speak up and to say the things that people are too scared to say. Football has a racism problem. It may not be, you know, the fans in abroad in Europe shouting monkey or throwing bananas on the pitch. It is racism and discrimination at the highest level. Look at the board, the management teams at football clubs. Look at the management teams of governing bodies. Look at the management teams of those who are making decisions at sports broadcasters. They don't look like me. They don't look like you either, Darren. And that is what the problem is. And the powers that be within within football and within sport need to look at this and stop posting blackout screens and posting messages of solidarity, because they're using this as an opportunity to seem like they're doing something, and they're not. And I don't want to see that. I don't want to hear heartfelt messages of solidarity. I want to see your management team pictures. I want to see your Christmas party pictures. I want to see who sits on your board. I want to see what you've done to improve diversity in the last 5-10 years. And I don't want to see what you've done at a grassroots level or entry level. I want to see what you've done to make sure that the management teams are diverse, to make sure that the leadership teams are diverse. And if you're not going to do that, then don't post messages of solidarity.
I would have to say, I should be staying in part of it, but I do agree. I think, Melissa, Rhian Brewster is where it leads, isn't it? He is operating in an industry where when he goes to work, football can't protect him from being racially abused.
Yeah, and this is an environment, as we said, for players, which is very inclusive, because it's, you know, based on how good you are really, rather than what you look like. And yet, even in that environment, which is shielded from, you know, everyday life, what we're really exposed to, even in that instance, you're still not protected. And I think when I've spoken to players, they bring up all the issues that the people sort of covering them, or, you know, who are meant to be helping, sharing their stories or whatever, cannot relate to them, most of them, because, as we've discussed, there's still not enough diverse voices in the media, diverse people that they can turn to within their football clubs, who can understand what they're going through, can understand why there's so much frustration, anger. And, you know, I made the point as well about the black squares. It's all good and well doing that, but that is not, oh, I've done that and, you know, I've contributed, I've made a difference. It's absolutely not. We have to see tangible action. And unfortunately, every time anyone of color makes this point, you'll get people saying, oh, you guys just want opportunities, you just want to be given jobs. Well, actually, no. There are very qualified people who will never get a chance because of the color of their skin, whereas there are so many people who are not qualified, or who are average or mediocre or whatever, and they are in the positions they are in because they've not had to, you know, sort of rise above the odds, or do double as much work or whatever to get where they are. And it really, really irks me that whenever you try and bring up the debate of adding diversity, because it is so important to hear people from different backgrounds and stuff give their perspective on something. Otherwise, all we're hearing is the same voice on a range of topics, and oftentimes that voice cannot relate to any of the topics.
Absolutely. Anita, what is it like trying to raise the issue within football, within the dressing room, within the game, as a player?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough thing to do in a team, in a locker room, because as well, for so long we've been taught sport and political, social activism don't intertwine, and it's not the place of footballers to talk about such issues, as we've seen with LeBron James.
Who teaches you that, Anita?
I think it's a culture, isn't it? You walk into it and it exists. It pre-exists before I walked into it and before other players walked into it. And if you don't see people do it before you or whatever, then you're least likely to do it yourself as well, because it's that unspoken word. Well, no one does it. Why are you going to do it and stand out, or, you know, be the problem, be the issue, you know? And I think and also, like you mentioned with the media, you know, I just saw recently LeBron James obviously has been very vocal on this issue, and the news anchors in America actually say publicly, what's he doing talking about this? He should just shut up and dribble. So if you're faced with that kind of rhetoric constantly, it becomes more challenging as an athlete, even, you know, especially if you're just, maybe you're not the star in your team with the platform to do that, to speak out, because then your position may be more indispensable than someone else. And that's why I feel like it's not just the work of Black people and ethnic minorities to speak up on these issues as a player as well. Why should I carry the emotional burden all the time? Of course, there are instances where I feel I have the confidence to speak up or say something or do something, but it would be nice if, you know, the allies, or the so-called allies we have, also weigh in and support the cause and the issues, because it also will have, I think, more kind of more punch in a way, you know, to see that, you know what, there are people that don't look like me, don't necessarily experience what I experience, but actually recognize the inequalities, recognize the injustices. The point is, people don't even acknowledge that as a starting point. So they need to acknowledge their privilege, acknowledge the different challenges that you don't face, that your teammate might face. So how are you going to be a good ally to support that as well? And also, just to make a last point, the institutions that govern my sport, that they also embed policies and regulations that allow us to have the space to use our platforms in those symbolic ways to get across a message. Because as we know, even though it's a step in the right direction, FIFA have decided we're not going to fine any players for making these statements and such. That's great. I don't want it to be a temporary thing though. I want this to be a long thought out process that is embedded into the structure as a policy that allows players to be player led in their way they communicate their message. Because as Melissa and Vaishali has mentioned, it's great to see that solidarity among players, and it almost has more power within our sport as well to capture the hearts and minds of the fans and people that work around in our industry. But I can tell you this, as a player in the professional game for 20 years, I've always been the minority. I maybe have always been at times the only Black player in my locker room, with not even a single, member of staff, a single member within my institution that is Black or ethnic minority. And that in itself is a challenge, because that's a lot to carry as well when that's my job, that's my workspace. And how can I know that if I raise something very important to me, won't be used against me, for example, or, it's easier to maybe get rid of me or that one individual than it is everybody else in those environments. So I really do think it's, like everyone's saying, we need a change, we need an overhaul, and we need to move the game forward.
Well, on the back of that, Vaishali, you mentioned Raheem Sterling. We were working during that period of Raheem Sterling. He spoke about the treatment of young Black men by our industry.
I think I feel more optimistic, perhaps because more people, like more footballers, are now speaking out about it. At the time, it's when Raheem Sterling spoke up, I can't remember how many footballers joined in with him, but obviously it wasn't sort of the whole industry. It feels like right now we've had so many players come out and speak about it. I mean, yesterday I tweeted out a link to Hector Bellerin's podcast with DeAndre Yedlin, and I can't remember a time where I would even see a video like that. Two footballers speaking about their personal experiences off the field, and that whole conversation about why footballers should be speaking up about things outside of football. Well, they're humans and members of society first before they are a footballer. And we've heard and we've seen with DeAndre Yedlin's tweets, he's from Seattle, Washington. He's got every right to speak about the issues that he faced as a young person growing up in America as anyone else. So for me, that was really refreshing to see. And I feel though, perhaps because we've had so many people speaking up about it in our industry, it could be, I hope that it is a seminal moment in our sport, in our industry, in our society. But the key thing, I think, is consistency and making sure that this conversation continues. We spoke about this after Raheem Sterling came out, and one of the things that we spoke about was, well, we hope this conversation doesn't go away, and we hope people don't forget about it in 6 months. And then actually, everyone's surprised again when we see another incident of racism in the sport. I feel though it didn't necessarily go away. People were still, the conversation was still happening behind the scenes, and I feel that this has happened again. And I hope that people continue those conversations in a united way. Everyone united, white people, Black people, people from ethnic minorities. And then I think by acknowledging that we do have a problem in society, there is a problem that continues to happen in the UK, in the US, in our sport, in football, that hopefully change can happen. But it starts with that conversation. It starts with everyone accepting that there is a problem.
Yeah, I'll direct the same question to our other guests. Melissa, Tyrone Mings went on a march in Birmingham yesterday. He said he's going to make no apology for what he wants to stand up for. Do you think this is a Raheem Sterling moment, or bigger?
I think it's bigger because this is not just a football moment or coverage of football moments or media portrayal in general. This is a massive society issue that's covered on a global scale and has got the world sort of plugged into it. So it's not just something our industry is having to reconcile with, because it's on such a global scale, such an emotive scale as well. And we've seen action all over the world in terms of protest marches and stuff. I think it's more symbolic in that sense. I also think oftentimes, you know, like we always say, something happens and everyone's sort of engaged in it, and then as time passes it sort of lessens. But I think the amount of people we've seen that have really thought to themselves, oh, hang on, I actually perhaps prior to this didn't actually realize how much privilege I have. I didn't perhaps really think to understand or to read up or to educate myself in any way about how people who do not look like me feel and go through life on a daily basis, and what I take for granted they don't get. So I think that awareness on such a wide sort of lens will help this go further than anything else we've witnessed before. I think as well, players have become so much more emboldened over the last few months. I think players are acutely aware of the fact that they are stronger than the brands that align themselves with them. Because in the past, there's always been that culture of, you're a footballer, play football. Don't speak about anything else, not who you're voting for, not what your personal life is like, not what your experiences of racism is like, definitely not that. And now we're in an era of, when players speak out, they get praised for it. Sterling, Brewster, Tyrone Mings over the last few months has really become somebody that you look up to, a reference point on anything that's wrong in the world, him speaking up about it. And so I think that the conversation has shifted, and the sort of state of play in the industry has shifted to the power being with the players, and them really feeling like if they speak out, it's not going to hamper them as much as it would have in the past. I do think there's a lot of work to be done, obviously. And like we said, the work is not just about PR campaigns or putting out pictures and stuff. Clubs need to diversify. Broadcasters need to diversify. All the publications need to diversify. Not to tick boxes, because like I said earlier, there are so many talented people of color across all the spheres, whether it be, clubs looking at lawyers to bring in, or administrators, or marketing people, whatever it be, and people in the media as well. There are so many talented people. It's giving them the opportunities. But beyond that, I think the fact that players are feeling differently about how they can use their voices and how strong they are at the moment will carry us further for longer.
I've seen the Rodney King 92. I saw Stephen Lawrence in 99. We've seen so many other things over the past couple of decades. Something, Carina, tells me that although we all feel it, the intensity of this moment, I'm still a little bit pessimistic. Am I wrong?
I mean, if 2020 has shown me anything, Darren, it's that don't underestimate the unexpected. So yes, we've been through so many civil rights moments within the industry, where within society, where there's been key moments that have caused people to stand up and protest, and to have legislations changed, and to have reports done. And I think, given the enormity of COVID-19 and the rates at which BAME people are dying from that, coupled with the fact that people are now highlighting the alignment with what's happening in the US with police killings and police brutality, to institutional and systematic racism here, and the fact that the BAME deaths from COVID are likely to come down to systematic racism and discrimination as well within the NHS. I think this actually could be a defining moment in history where something massive could come out of it. But like I said, I think it's amazing that, you know, people are standing up and using their voices and protesting and speaking out. And, you know, like Melissa said, footballers are speaking out. And I think that's absolutely amazing. I think it's brilliant. I think the energy needs to continue for real change to take place. The racism that is embedded within British culture and British society is not new. This has been going on for decades and decades. So it's not something that's going to change overnight. And I think we have a responsibility as individuals, as mothers, as fathers, as future parents, to really look at how we can do better for future generations. And a lot of that comes with educating the children now, or educating future children to be well-rounded individuals, where they aren't being judged themselves because of the color of their skin, but also they're not judging others because of the color of their skin. I don't think it's easier. Yeah, I don't think it's easy. I think it's got to the point that I don't care anymore about the backlash. I don't care whether I'm blacklisted. I don't care whether, you know, there's a lot of people that follow me on social media who have unfollowed me in the last few days. And I would assume, considering all I've been talking about is, you know, racism and discrimination, it's as a result of that. And whether it makes them feel uncomfortable or not, I don't know, but that's a them problem. That's not my problem. I'm not here to make anybody feel comfortable, because racism and discrimination is a very uncomfortable topic, and it's actually very uncomfortable to experience it yourself. So for me, it's not that it's got easier. It's more of a mind shift that actually I'm a mum, I'm an aunt, I'm a godmother. I have a responsibility to be a role model for those around me, to let them know that even when you don't feel powerful enough to use your voice, use it. Because there's actually power in standing up and saying, you know what, I'm going to speak out about this. And I think if more people speak out and, you know, try their best to educate people, it's not my job to educate people. Google is free. There's books that they can read online. There's audio books that you can read. The accessing information is so much easier now than it was in the past. It's not my job to educate people, but you know what? I'll give them a free pass at the moment, and I will use my platform and I'll use my voice to educate people where possible. If that means that, you know, in 2-3 months' time, I might go and work with a brand and they say, oh, maybe covertly they may think, oh, I don't really want to work with her because she called us out a few months ago. That's fine. That's fine. Again, that's your problem, not mine, because there's a load of other brands that will want to work with myself. And I think I can totally understand where Anita's coming from. I've been that person where you're the only black person in the room and something has been said or something's happened and you don't feel like you can speak out about it. You do feel isolated and you kind of go into a shell and freeze, that you feel that you can't say anything. I've been there. But I think as you get older, and as you know, I'm quite senior in my position now at work, and I can have open and honest conversations with my CEO about race and discrimination, and she gets it. So I don't feel from an employer perspective I will be reprimanded. Maybe it may affect me in terms of broadcasters and, you know, other brands. But again, that's if they feel uncomfortable because I'm addressing something that I experience personally and an issue that is widely recognized as an issue within society, and they feel uncomfortable with hearing that, then there's not much more I can do about that.
Carina, you and I have been on panels before. I know how hard you've worked to get to the position that you're in at the moment. But talk to me a little bit about what Anita and yourself have touched on. How difficult were those moments where you were isolated, where you were by yourself? And if anyone else has had moments like that.
I was going to say, I first started in football about 11-12 years ago, I think. And I worked at an all-male agency. I was really lucky because the boys that I worked with were absolutely brilliant. They never looked at me any differently. It was like, Carina gets the job done, so that's fine. where I lived, where I was existing in a bubble within my office environment, is bubbles would be burst when I would step out and I would go to clubs and I would meet with chairmen of football clubs. And I remember there was, I'm sure I've said this, told you this story before, Darren, there was an incident where it was during football transfer window, and I went to see a chairman at a club because one of our players had an issue with staying at the club. He wanted to leave, they wanted him to stay, and so they asked to have a meeting with the agent couldn't make it, so he said, Carina, can you go instead? And I went and I sat down in the room, and the chairman came in and he said, who the hell are you? And I was like, oh, I'm Carina, I'm here to talk about XYZ. And he went, I'm not talking grown folk business with a woman. And I was like, right, okay. And in that moment, it's right, do I shrink? Do I get real South London on you because I'm from South? Or do I just gloss it over? So I did kind of a mix of it. I did feel really uncomfortable because I was like, I don't know whether I can, this is a chairman of a football club, and me being nice to him impacts as whether, what happens with our player. So I kind of took a moment and I said to him, you want him to stay, so either you can sit and talk to me or I leave and I take the player with me. It's entirely up to you. And, he sat and he spoke to us, but there's been so many incidents where either someone has said something because I'm a woman, or they have said something because I'm black, or they've said something because I'm a black woman. And I think the power in actually speaking out, now that I think about it, has probably come from more women coming into sports and also more black women coming into sports. We're still not at a place where we should be, but we're at a better place than when I started 11, 12 years ago, that I feel more empowered now that I am able to speak out.
Yeah, like Carina, actually, I think Carina makes a really good point, and I resonate. Actually, my experiences they actually are linked to Carina's, in that one of the things that has helped me speak out more about the sexism, which is predominantly, I think, the thing that I experienced the most within football, it for me has been the sexism rather than racism. I've heard a racist comment made in a newsroom, but it wasn't to me, it was about someone else. But I haven't had anyone outrightly say anything racist to me. But sexist comments I have heard made, directed towards me. I was actually on a live show once. This was towards the beginning of my broadcast career. And, the person I was working alongside made a comment during an ad break. And at the time I was so shocked, and I was so young in my career, I didn't know what to say. So I decided not to say anything, and I kind of half laughed it off, and then realized later on that actually I should have said something. But, the circumstances were such that it was an ad break. It was 2 minutes of time between we were meant to be speaking. But one of the things that has helped me now speak up about it is that I've grown up within the field. I understand the field. More women are in the field, and I feel like if I do speak up about it, I will be supported by not just by female colleagues, but also my male colleagues as well. And I remember the looks I got from some of the journalists who'd been in the game for years and years, and no one made an overt comment to me, but I took it as though me being different. Now, whether or not that was me being an Asian woman or a woman, I took that to be I was slighted by it, and I felt that it was in part down to sexism, perhaps racism, but for me it felt more like sexism. But I think the power of more women and more diversity in the field means that if you're a footballer, if you're a football professional, if you're a journalist, you do feel that now you can speak up about it, and you won't be ostracized for it by either your colleagues, bosses, future bosses, etc.
It seems to be consistent, especially when you're very front facing. So people assume that because you've got what they call a profile, so because you're doing lots of TV or radio, or you've got a lot of followers on Twitter, that means that they can shovel racist and sexist abuse your way. And if ever you try and pull out any comments or whatever, they'll tell you you're playing the race card or the sexism card. If you want to mix it with the big boys, you've got to be able to take it. And you know what? I am so immune to the comments that it really doesn't matter to me. I'm very successful in my career. I'm very passionate about it.
But should you be immune? Melissa.
Yeah.
Would you be?
I was actually coming to that point because Ian Wright the other day, you know, when he'd seen comments and flagged it, people were telling him to ignore it. And he was saying, you know, I usually ignore it, but this time it got to me. And I was thinking, he's feeling sort of like he's guilty for, you know, reacting in a certain way to those vicious comments. He felt like, oh, I should be better than that. I should have not really seen it or whatever. And that really, I felt that, because the amount of times I've seen something and thought, oh, there we go again, and left it, and actually scolded myself for those seconds where, you know, it frustrated me or whatever. And that shouldn't be the case, actually. We shouldn't have to put up with it. And I've actually been thinking, I get asked to give, you know, young females a lot of advice about coming through the industry, and especially young females of color. And the first thing I always tell them is you have to have really thick skin. You have to be able to withstand a lot of ugly comments consistently. And I've been thinking more and more to myself, why am I having to give out such advice to young females, and especially young females of color, looking to do what they're studying towards and what they want to be very good at and what they're working really hard to become? And I thought, it's absolutely insane that we have to frame things this way and sort of prepare people, youngsters, for this kind of environment, because it is what it is. And when I was younger, so I think this is my 12th year, incredibly, I feel very, very old saying that, in football. But when I first started, I was the only female in what was an entire building of males, and that continued for a very long time. And now that I feel like I've, you know, got myself into a position where my voice matters, my platform matters, I'm not afraid to say absolutely anything, anywhere, whether it be on Sunday Supplement, whether it be on here, whether it be on Twitter. Because if I am not using what I've worked so hard to get to the benefit of others looking to break through, to right some wrongs, to educate people, to make a stand, what is the point? I do not want to be, in 5 years' time, still telling young women, you have to have thick skin, you have to roll with these comments.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. I think for me, I think like everyone has mentioned, it comes with growing up. And, you know, as I've gotten older and become more an experienced player in my teams, you know, I've garnered the respect of my teammates as well, and people that I work with. And over that time, it's about building trust as well, you know, and when you have that trust and these situations arise, I felt the confidence that there are people that I can communicate that with, who will support me and make sure that they will at least put in action some things that will, like, you know, sort it out and discuss it, you know, within my group. And I've been fortunate, I think, for the locker rooms that I've been present in, that I've been surrounded by people that actually, I haven't really had to experience, in my opinion, direct racism. Of course, we've all experienced, in general life, I've experienced racism and both subtly and overt. But I think that for me has been the main thing, that I realized that I also, like you've mentioned, have to open the door to make it more comfortable and easier for younger players coming into that environment. So even though it wasn't by design or, you know, choice as such, that I felt that I was going to be this championing like activist as such, it's landed on me and I've embraced it, I think, and it's just because I want to improve the game and make sure that more players from diverse backgrounds get involved in playing in all roles within football. Because as far as I can tell, it's even more important now than ever to speak up. When I first broke into the national team, I had a black manager, or mixed race, you know, Hope Powell, and then I had black teammates, I had mixed race teammates, far more than we see today. And I think the lack of diverse or BAME athletes coming into, especially the women's game, is quite discouraging and disappointing from my perspective, because, you know, I feel like the opportunities are ever more present for young women from ethnic minorities, especially today, compared to the past, when we entered the game with, you know, very little and very little support. So for me, it's just important to speak up on these issues and find out, you know, what is stopping young women in particular, of all backgrounds, investing their time, their passion into the sports they love, and especially in football.
Does it feel a little bit hollow, given that you're not really with your teammates to celebrate it?
Yeah, I suppose it's very surreal to know you've won a title and not get all the usual celebrations that come with that. And obviously, we're all in different places in the world right now as well, with different restrictions, and it's a new normal for us, I guess, for everybody. And today we had the Zoom call, and we were told we won the title, and it was just strange because we were just staring at each other in the screen and just like high-fiving in the air and like, good job, enjoy your celebrations. But it is what it is, and I think we're just grateful that our hard work this season has been acknowledged regardless of the circumstances, and it means a positive step for Chelsea as a club into next season as well with Champions League. So it's just going to motivate all of the girls and all of us even more for next season.
Do you have mixed feelings? Because I know obviously how strongly you feel about the current situation, and that mixed with the jubilation of your success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, ironically, I guess, being in the midst of a pandemic where normally we'd be together and the celebrations would naturally just organically happen, even if the current global, you know, protesting and everything that's going on as a result of George Floyd's murder, you know, this regard, I think we can almost, for myself, I feel like I can tone down my celebrations related to my sport and my job, because I feel like this is a much more serious issue to focus on anyway, as also a BME person and woman. I feel like there's so much energy out there for this cause, and I want to be part of that in a positive way. Of course, I'm proud of what I've achieved this season and my team, but I think there's a recognition that some things are just bigger than football and bigger than myself. And it doesn't feel right in one sense to be overly jubilating when so much tragic circumstances are surrounding us at this current time.
I will bring you in a second, Melissa, but I'll just get your reaction first, Anita, about Liverpool's anger. I mean, they say that so many games to play. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we recognise it, and it's fair for them to have their own opinion based on how the season was decided. And I think as players, every single player, whether you were at the top of the table, the bottom of the table, would have wanted to complete the season. There's no doubt about that. And honestly, you know, we don't make the decisions regarding how these outcomes are decided either. So there's not much of a role that we get to play in that. But ultimately, I understand the dilemmas basically that the league had regarding this. And in one sense, you look at previous seasons, there will be teams that would feel like potentially if they had allowed Liverpool potentially to stay in the WSL for next season, well, they would feel that was unfair too. So there's no real way to please everybody. And I think that as an athlete, we know that, you know, in general, because we're competitive people and you win and you lose. In one sense, I think the one positive that Liverpool should take from this circumstance is that they probably know they have a lot more to build upon moving forward as a club for the women's setup, in terms of their support for the women's team, the resources to maybe put them in a better situation also coming, you know, within the season, so that they can avoid situations like a relegation, for example.
Melissa Reddy, Was it brave of the FA to relegate a club as big as Liverpool?
I don't think brave is the right word. I think they had to settle on the least worst outcome because, you know, there is no way of pleasing anyone, I think, in the situation we're find ourselves in, which is so unprecedented. And I felt so much sympathy actually for anyone needing to make any kind of decision, because when you actually speak to people and understand how layered the level of thinking is and how, you know, the depth of all the things that they have to consider, it's quite hard. My feeling on Liverpool and the women's team is that Liverpool haven't really done enough to invest in and to continue the early energy they showed in the women's team, in all sorts of respects, whether in terms of, you know, payment to players, infrastructure, where they train, where they play. Just there's been a gradual decline in sort of interest and investment in the women's side of the game, and that's possibly because, you know, the women's team doesn't make much money, or it operates at a loss, and so they, you know, are treating it as such, which is quite, I guess, distressing, disappointing, and I would like to see a lot more energy and investment from them into the women's team. Maybe this is the big wake-up call that they needed. So in that sense, I think it could potentially be a positive. But yeah, I don't think, I understand the complaints and why they're annoyed that the season has ended without them playing all the games that they had to fulfill. But they should have been in a much better position, because they should have been much better funded. And a team the scale of Liverpool, with a global fan base, with the men's team, you know, 25 points clear at the summit of the Premier League, you know, such a contrast between the two just feels wrong.
Absolutely. And I think Chelsea are a really good example of when, if you invest money in the women's team, just how much stronger I think it can make the club overall. We've obviously seen unprecedented levels of support for the women's game, thankfully, following the World Cup last year. And I think that momentum has continued on. And I think with Chelsea, Emma Hayes has just been fantastic. I mean, that's her third league title, her seventh major trophy at the club. She is an exceptional coach. I do wonder whether or not she will stay on long term, but for now she's remained loyal, and the club are benefiting from it. Obviously, you've seen with the outcome of today. Yes, Chelsea were 1 point behind Man City, but they had the best, I mean, Anita will know this, the best head-to-head record amongst those top three, unbeaten in the league. So I don't think, I think Man City came out and said, we can understand how it's all been worked out. I don't think they can have too many complaints. They also did play the game more, hadn't they, than Chelsea. So, you know, the club are in a fantastic position in terms of the ladies, and they're clearly building with that signing of Timo Werner for the men's side as well.
And the future for the women's game, a question to all of you really, post-coronavirus, there isn't enough money in the women's game. It seems as though decisions have been taken fairly quickly compared to the men's game. Thoughts, a final thought from all of you, where we go from here? Start with you, Anita, because obviously this is a terrific day for you, but are there wider implications to consider for the WSL?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like Vaishali mentioned, you know, I feel very fortunate to be at Chelsea because I think they have shown a long-term commitment to the women's side. And they really do work quite hard to integrate us into the club as a whole, into the various projects and community activities that goes on. And there is that feeling, you know, but there's too much disparity, I think, between the clubs as well, and how they're organized and how they strategize around the women's team. And I think somehow that needs to be.
What do you mean by that, Anita?
I mean, in terms of the resources, in terms of the access, the investment, the sponsorship, you know, we're obviously fortunate to be at Chelsea. There's a big global brand, you know, quite deep pockets, I suppose, with the ownership. But I think the way that we have felt, at least as players, is that they are really starting to utilize the brand of the women's team as well to spread their message in lots of other causes and areas as well, like the mental health things, the foundation, the community projects. Our owner taking us to Israel to experience some of that so we could understand anti-Semitism and things like that. I think that's a bigger commitment that is bringing us all in and buying into that. And I think also by the club, getting individual sponsors for the women's team, which we are now going to get at Chelsea with Hyundai showing a commitment, Shaw, antiperspirant, things like that, is showing how they really are putting us on the table, I guess, with the stakeholders and the different body brands and sponsors that they interact with. And I don't think that's necessarily happening across all the clubs. And that's a problem, because this pandemic highlights again the chronic underinvestment at the foundations of the women's game that also made it slightly more challenging for us to resume the season in the first place, even if we were to have testing and things like that, because the amount of money that would have been required per se in order for us to do that would also be detrimental to some of the smaller clubs in the long term for sort of improving the things they already have. So in one sense, I think it's a time actually for football as well to kind of reset and look internally at how they can better strategize for the women's game and really have some hard commitments that show they're invested, they're truly invested, not just for now, but the future. Because as you said, the Women's World Cup has spurred on the interest, the growth of the women's game, the participation of women in women's sport. I think that's only going to increase even more, because this pandemic has also shown that average people in general are taking up activity in sport, and things like that. So I think there's great opportunities ahead if the commitment is there, really.
And thank you very much for getting those plugs in for Shaw and Hyundai as well.
Apologies.
No, listen. Melissa, where does the WSL go from here? I mean, you made those very good points about the future for Liverpool.
Yeah, I think we talk in general during this period about a cultural reset for the game, holistically, whether it be Premier League, Championship, lower leagues. But that's also in terms of the women's game as well. It's often been an afterthought. And so it's like, oh, let's sort everything else out and then we'll focus there. And I think Anita's right. There needs to be stronger commitment in terms of, if you're going to have the WSL, make it the best that it can possibly be and give it the opportunity to be the best it can be, with administrative support, with encouraging sponsorships, with really emphasizing the teams that are well run and who do take it seriously, like Chelsea obviously do, Arsenal historically as well. And I think that if you're really into it, and if you're thinking about it more than just something that you need to have so that, English football doesn't look bad because it doesn't have the WSL. I think if the thinking changes around it, that would help a whole lot.
Vaishali, we're going to discuss Timo Werner. £53 million Chelsea have paid for him, and they've beaten Liverpool to the punch, although Melissa will tell us in a second just why Liverpool have decided not to pursue him. Talk first of all, however, about what Chelsea have signed.
Certainly a player at the top of his game. He's coming into his peak years. He's 24. So they are signing someone who has a proven record of scoring goals at the highest level in the Bundesliga and crucially in the Champions League as well. And I say crucially because, we saw this season with Frank Lampard's young and promising side that while they took on the opportunities of playing in the Premier League and the Champions League for the first time, with aplomb, and at the end of the day, they were experiencing some of these games for the first time on those grandest of stages. And you just wonder how some of them handle the pressure. We think about that game against Bayern Munich, for example, with Chelsea. So they're signing a promising player who, as a forward, you'd imagine has his best years ahead of him. You know, you think about forwards and when they typically are at the top of their game, it's sort of mid-20s, late 20s, he's 24. So he's a player for the next couple of years, clearly to develop at the club with. I also think they're signing a player who can provide serious competition for a starting spot up front, if he was to play up front by himself, to Tammy Abraham, who has done really well, being an academy graduate, coming into that team, taking on the pressure of being that player up front. But he didn't necessarily have that competition for places because Olivier Giroud was not favoured under Frank Lampard. Now, he's staying on another year, which I think is good news as a backup. I think Michy Batshuayi, unfortunately for him, I think he could be on his way out. He hasn't really done enough to justify a starting spot. So now, Tammy Abraham, you'd imagine, would have someone up who will be at the club, who he can learn off, but also who together they can improve, and that can only benefit the club as well. Although I do think it's quite interesting, Tammy Abraham's individual situation, because he's out of contract in 2 years' time. But yeah, I think Chelsea have done really well with this signing. They've signed someone who Liverpool wanted, as Melissa will obviously no doubt talk about, and who also had talks with Manchester United as well, just before the lockdown happened. So he's a man in demand. And it is surprising that they spent this amount of money, although that was his release clause, at this particular time, given that the assumption was clubs would put a lockdown on how much money they are going to be spending. You look at the example of Tottenham, taking out £175 million emergency loan. But I think Chelsea's stance is really that actually let's capitalise on this. And that's the benefit of having an owner who is willing to put money into the club to help them on the pitch.
Melissa Reddy, were Liverpool beaten to the punch?
Yeah, I think for the longest time, I would go back to 2015, actually. It's always seemed like Timo Werner and Liverpool would be a deal that happened, just given, you know, Jurgen Klopp's style of football, Werner's strengths, the fact that he fits the stylistic profile of the club and has only matured in terms of responsibility, and ballooned his output in the final third. So from all aspects, a deal made sense. Now, last summer, he was meant to go to Bayern Munich. That deal didn't materialize. And so he decided to stay at Leipzig, sign a new deal, which then contained these staggered release clauses in his contract. And he has been quite vocal, as we all know, considering we're in the media and we read all the stories, about his desire to go to Anfield, work under Jurgen Klopp, play for Liverpool. And so even, for the last, I would say, 3 or 4 months, it seemed like this is nailed on to happen, Timo Werner to Liverpool. But in February, I'd done a piece saying the plan for the club this summer was they understand that they're not playing catch up anymore now that they're the team to beat. So that's it comes with the different sort of complications. But the reason they got to that point is because they were quite prudent in the market, and they only ever bought what they needed, and they only ever spent massive amounts of money, blockbuster fees, on the players they thought were game changers, Virgil van Dijk and Alisson. So even before coronavirus, they were planning on having a relatively quiet window. Coronavirus happens, and that sort of complicates matters even further because of the financial implications, so much uncertainty. Football clubs are always seen as these, sort of juggernauts, these mega billion-dollar businesses. And while they're worth a lot of money, they also have a lot of expenses, and so much income has been taken away from them during this period. Now, what I know is that Jurgen Klopp and Timo Werner spoke in April. Klopp explained, financial situation. The club couldn't make any concrete commitments to transfers because they don't know what the transfer landscape is going to look like and what their own financial landscape is going to look like. Now, I think, with the June 15 deadline on the clause of £53 million, I think if no one was willing to activate that clause, when June 15 passed, then Liverpool would perhaps negotiate with Leipzig over a fee, because I think it drops to £36 million in a year. So they could, come to some sort of agreement, maybe £38 million or whatever. But the fact that there was no commitment to meet the clause, the fact that Werner had that experience last summer of almost going to Bayern Munich and not doing it, I don't think there was a desire on his part to not grab an opportunity if it came up again. And Chelsea have really used the situation to their advantage really well, because he's a Germany international, Germany's number 9. He's got, over a century of experiences in the Bundesliga, which is a very fast-paced league, playing counter-attacking football, and the season under Julian Nagelsmann being a possession-based team. He's very versatile. He's still young. So as a package in terms of the player, he's a very good deal. But they've also, because of Liverpool's hesitation or unwillingness to commit, and Liverpool basically cooling interest and, I wouldn't say walking away, but the initiative seemed like it was on Timo. And there was a sense that Timo wanted Liverpool more than Liverpool wanted him. So Chelsea, using the situation to their advantage, tell him, you're going to be, one of the main men in Frank Lampard's rebuild. We've got an exciting young team that we're putting together. And when you actually think about Chelsea's team and what they're building, it is very exhilarating. I think as a young player, you'd also kind of see, I want to be part of that project and help them become a consistent force in Europe and stuff again. Also, rewarding him really handsomely, salary-wise and stuff. And I think for Chelsea, it makes a lot of sense, probably a lot more sense for them to spend that money now than it makes for Liverpool.
Just before I bring in Anita again, what do you think Liverpool will do now? Do you think it will mean more chances for Ian Brewster? Do you think they could make a cut price move for Aubameyang, a proven striker who will be available cut price because he won't sign a new deal at Arsenal? Or do you think they'll pull another rabbit out of the hat?
When I did that piece in February, one of the things I was told is, how many times have Liverpool signed the obvious player, the player everyone looks at and says, yeah, that's the best in that position, or he's the most recognized, or whatever? It's really been Virgil van Dijk. Even Alisson, who was at Roma at the time, wasn't seen as the best goalkeeper in the world or one of the best. He had a high ceiling, people knew, but people were questioning the price tag then. So it was only really Virgil van Dijk. When they went for Roberto Firmino, Mohamed Salah and Sadio Mane, they got a lot of stick for it, because those guys were seen as not good enough for a club of Liverpool's stature. The Andy Robertson deal, which, £8 million, basically a swap deal for Kevin Stewart to get Andy Robertson in, who's, one of the best left backs in the world at the moment. Yeah. No one thought that they were going to take an academy project midfielder and make him one of the best right backs in the world currently in Trent Alexander-Arnold. So Liverpool really pride themselves on looking in places and finding solutions where other clubs might not necessarily have the depth in analysis to do so. So I think they might have a few tricks up their sleeve. I don't think they do much of the expected stuff. I know there's obviously lots of talk on players like Kai Havertz and Jadon Sancho, and while Liverpool have liked those players, Sancho, for example, Liverpool wanted to get him when he was having issues at City, but they knew there wouldn't be an opportunity for a direct deal there. But the cost of those players in the current climate, without one of their big hitters leaving, just doesn't make sense at all. So I'm really interested to see what they'll do this summer. But even before COVID-19, they were saying it would be minimal.
Well, Anita Asante, lots of jubilation with the men's team over there. I'm sure you don't care while you drink your champagne, but as far as Timo Werner is concerned, Do you feel that Chelsea now have a game changer in the men's team?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think you can already see the current squad they have are really invigorated by Lampard, and he's showing a lot of faith in his younger players as well. And as Melissa mentioned, I think Timo Werner probably thinks that he can come into this new and exciting team and build something, build on previous success that Chelsea has had in the past. And we've been used to star quality in Eden Hazard, and perhaps he feels he can come in and be that future star at Chelsea and have the space to do that as well. So I honestly think it's an exciting time for Chelsea, and in my opinion, I guess they've actually they spent wisely. They made the moves at the right time for what they need as well. It's going to only make, I think, that squad more competitive, which, as we know, I think as a player, I think when you train in a very competitive environment, it only drives and improves your performance. Either way, whether he ends up starting games at the beginning or not, and Tammy does, I think they will have that competitive edge for both of them to push each other, which will also push the team as a whole. So yeah, I think at the moment it's a great move for him. I'm actually a Liverpool fan, so we'll just throw it out there.
What do you think Werner's signing will mean? Do you see Chelsea, with the surgery they're performing at the moment, heading back to the top of
I think for me, I think it's a great contribution or signing for Chelsea. I think there's no reason why in the season to come that they won't be a force to be reckoned with. But currently, I think there's so much momentum with Liverpool in the performance and the squad and the belief. And as Melissa mentioned, they didn't always go for the most prominent signings. I think that also is telling in itself, because it shows that you have a coach and a management and a scouting group as a whole that really believes in its talent. And that comes through, I think, the Liverpool squad in the way they play, their resilience. So my cards are still on Liverpool to actually be at the top of the table.
Okay, Vaishali?
Well, I mean, Liverpool are heading for their first ever Premier League title. They've been on top of their game for a couple of seasons now. They narrowly missed out on the Premier League last season. I think it's going to take a while for other clubs to try and break that sort of two-club grapple on the Premier League. But I think Chelsea have a 2 to 3 year plan under Frank Lampard where they are seriously going to try to do that. And, this summer you're going to have Timo Werner coming in, Hakim Ziyech as well. Those are two exciting players. They are now going in for a left back. It's believed Ben Chilwell is the man that they want. So they are really focusing on building a young team, but a young team full of talent who have the experience of playing at the top level. And I think if they can do that, they can clearly make top 4 this season, next season, but then start to move up the league and try to break that hole that City and Liverpool currently have. And I think they can do it.
And so, Melissa, Vaishali is effectively saying that Liverpool are going to win the league again next season.
You know what? I think because it's such a short turnaround to the next season, I think teams that are already in rhythm, already well established, who keep the core of their squad together, very little sort of changes, will have an advantage because it's just basically a continuation. I think Frank Lampard, I really enjoy what he's doing at Chelsea. I'm a fan of it. I think they're going to be quite exciting to watch, but I think he'll be the first to say it's a development project. They're not the finished article and they're not close yet. They have to sort of build together, which is what Liverpool did under Jurgen Klopp, and have common experiences to then get to where they want to go in the journey. But I'm looking forward to the season restarting, let alone next season.
We got through 2 hours without mentioning the words Project Restart, and you just got within the shadow of the post and you mentioned it. A terrific conversation. I'm really grateful to all of you. Melissa Reddy from The Independent, Vaishali Bhardwaj from Premier League Productions, and I can't say congratulations enough to Anita Asante of the Women's Super League champions Chelsea. Congratulations to you.